We give away an amount of money every year that is calculated on the basis of the size of our wage bill. So it's not to do with profits, and it's kind of accounted for before we get to the profit part. It's like an essential sort of business expense. So we take it out of our takings, and then it's split into two different parts. The 1% fund is for UK projects, and the 4% fund is for projects in the majority world. And yeah, it goes largely to kind of pretty grassroots groups that sort of share our vision for a more equitable and environmentally careful world.
This is How Not to Do Business from Changing the Narrative. I'm Chris King, and this is a show about companies that are breaking convention, refusing to embrace the usual rules of who owns a business, who makes decisions, and who gets paid what. And they're succeeding. Each episode, I talk to the people within these organizations. Rising food prices are something most of us notice. We feel it at the till long before we see it in any statistic. And underneath the food choices we make, there can sit a quiet assumption that the food we're told is better for us, the organic, locally grown food that isn't ultra-processed, that can be traced back to a person, is too expensive, and so is the first thing to go when money's tight. There's a Whole Food supermarket in Manchester where making that kind of food affordable was one of the aims from the very start. 30 years on, it's still trading and still holding to it. It's called Unicorn. 2/3 of what it sells is organic, along with all the fresh fruit and veg. It's owned by the 50-odd people who work there, all of them directors, all on the same hourly wage, whatever job they do. And it puts its own prices up on the shop wall next to the supermarkets, so you can see for yourself. My guests this week are Debbie and Kellie, two of Unicorn's worker owners, and we get into how they hold those prices where they are, why they have never opened a second shop and give the model away instead, and why owner turned out to be the wrong word for what they are. Here's Debbie and Kellie. Enjoy. If, first of all, you wouldn't mind just introducing yourselves and share a bit about the work that you do at Unicorn, that'd be great.
My name's Kellie. I've been at Unicorn nearly 28 years. And I do a variety of things, from working on the shop floor, on the till, on veg, unloading pallets, putting produce on the shop floor, buying, looking after some of the categories of the products that we sell. Also work on strategy and finance and marketing. So yeah, a whole kind of spectrum really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I'm Debbie, and like Kellie, we all do lots of different things. So we are a multitasking cooperative. So nobody just does one thing, and we all work at different levels of the business and in different departments. So my main shop floor work is serving on the till and staffing the deli counter. And then up here, I work with Kellie in the education and marketing team. And I mainly look after our customer communications and kind of community engagement stuff. And I also help look after our solidarity funds, which is the money we give away to partners in the UK and overseas.
Okay. So, and would you like to speak a bit more about that, the solidarity fund? What?
Yeah. So it's something that's kind of baked into our commercial operation. So we give away an amount of money every year that is calculated on the basis of the size of our wage bill. So it's not to do with profits, and it's kind of accounted for before we get to the profit part. It's like an essential sort of business expense. So we take it out of our takings, and then it's split into two different parts. The 1% fund is for UK projects, and the 4% fund is for projects in the majority world. And yeah, it goes largely to kind of pretty grassroots groups that sort of share our vision for a more equitable and sort of environmentally careful world. So I mean, I could talk a lot more about it, but that's it in a nutshell.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's brilliant. It's brilliant that you do that. And how did you both come into Unicorn? What was your journey
So I'd studied economics and politics, and I'd worked in alternative media for a magazine called Red Pepper, which was a fusion of socialist and green politics. And when I was studying, I'd kind of ended up specialising or studying more of the green politics side of economics and politics anyway. So it was it was passion when I went in there, as well as community focused work as well. So I worked in that realm, and I did do work for Wigan Council for a while as a press officer for young people and some other work in that realm. And Unicorn, I kind of knew about it and was very excited when I heard it had opened and the principles that it had, and was tempted to apply quite early. And then people were like, oh, you don't want to work in a grocery shop. And then there were some jobs advertised again. It's like, actually I do. It looks so exciting. It's a worker co-op. It's got these ethics. It's making something, and it's not just talking about it. It's like real living example of some of these things that are, quite exciting. And so that was a long time ago, and it has been exciting, and that's why I'm still here. Yeah.
Yeah. So I came to Unicorn very temporarily, I thought, but that was 22 years ago now. So I'd done a degree in international development, and the values, were the thing that attracted me. I knew I wanted to do, I wasn't drawn to do development work, even though I cared about it. It didn't feel like the right thing for me for lots of reasons. But I knew I was, global trade and the environment were things that I really cared about. And I loved food as well. I had worked with food, in various ways. So my mum shopped here. I'm from Manchester originally, and I came back again temporarily, I thought, and lived with my mum and dad for a bit. And my mum said, there's this great shop. She'd fallen in love with it. And as soon as I came, I fell in love with it too. So I applied for casual work, thinking I would just do that while I figured out what I, really wanted to do. And then I've never left. And yeah, much like Kelly, this is what I want to do. It just ticks so many boxes for me, sort of ethically and practically. It really suits me, the variety and the fact that we use our bodies to work as well as our minds and our hearts as well. So yeah. We're lifers, I think.
Yeah. So it seems. I think that speaks a lot to what working in co-ops and obviously Unicorn specifically for you both in terms of just offering people what they need on a psychological level, in terms of community, in terms of meaning and purpose. I think I see that time and again with everybody that I speak to from workers' co-ops, that it just satisfies these fundamental needs in a way that conventional work generally doesn't. I think that's important. So obviously you've been at Unicorn for a long time, but how do you think your experience working there within Unicorn and the workers' cooperative functioning, how does that compare to a conventional business?
So I've got very little experience anywhere else because I was so young when I came here, but I had worked in another whole food shop, which wasn't a co-op. And I just felt aware really quickly here that when there were things that didn't seem to work in practice, there I just had to sort of keep doing things that I thought were a bit silly or a bit not right, that didn't make sense, and here I get to, at least if not always get my own way, I certainly get to challenge why we do things the way we do, and I get to participate in that process. And for me, that just transforms it.
Yeah, I think that's kind of, I suppose in the early days, it was different anyway. So I suppose for me in the early days, there was a level of excitement over like the co-creation and building something that was kind of quite a new feeling that was just, it was like a honeymoon period. It was just, that was really great. And I suppose a lot of people, when you're building something, can have that. And it's great on an emotional level, and it's exciting. And you're working with other people who are on board with the same mission. And we've got that the same today, but it's like, it's a bigger organization. You're not building and changing at the same pace. So I couldn't speak for people who are newer here, but there's certainly that thread is kind of still there. And I've not felt that on an emotional level in other places.
Yeah. How have things evolved then from those early days, from the nascent kind of period to where it is now? Obviously, it's been quite a period of time, and it would have evolved in so many different ways. So can you maybe speak a little bit about that and how it has?
So obviously our governance kind of, our management structure has had to change enormously. So where in the early days, everybody would meet together on a weekly basis.
Yeah, so we had like every fortnight we met as a kind of management committee, however you want to say it, making that kind of business decisions. And on the other week, so every fortnight, we would also meet as a training. So we would meet as a body every week, 1 week management stuff, 1 week training.
Yeah. Whereas now, obviously, there's no way it would be appropriate to do that with 54, 53 members.
I'm going to say that.
It's around that. So we do actually meet fortnightly for training still, or as a collective, but we wouldn't be making decisions collectively on that sort of scale. So we still meet as a membership 3 or 4 times a year, and that's where the big sort of strategic decisions are made. But we've got a structure now where as much decision making as possible is pushed out to sort of smaller groups. We call them circles. So we have a sort of sociocratic governance structure where there's a lot of devolution of power to the sort of smallest group possible, because it isn't democratic to be deciding everything together, obviously, at this sort of scale. So over the years that I've been here, we've had a number of periods where we've had to rethink, how we make decisions and the number of people that should be involved in what level of decision making, so that you don't have 20 people sitting around deciding what kind of paper bag to source, because that can, you can drift into having a lot of people involved in very small decisions and not quite notice that you're doing it.
Yeah, it's really important to understand that it's all like collective energy, and you want to direct it in the areas where it's needed and with the people who know most about it. So say our veg circle, the veg buyers, they're talking with growers, they're crop planning, they're understanding the impacts of season, all these things. So, they need to have the devolved responsibility that kind of fits with their knowledge and experience. So, because they're then responsible for wastage and all the other things that go with veg buying, and that's a massive part of our business. So that's why there's kind of clear aims and domains for circles, responsibilities, with accountability and transparency, all these things that are really important within any organisation, not just a worker co-op.
Yeah. But I guess, so that's what has changed. But I think what hasn't changed, and something that Unicorn is really, really good at, is that we had, we both joined, after it was set up, but the founders had this incredibly clear vision for the kind of shop that Unicorn was going to be. And, there are small sort of deviations, and we respond to the landscape, that's going around us. But I think, in terms of the sort of core commercial and ethical model has remained remarkably unchanged in the time that, in the 30 years that we've existed. Because yes, we are celebrating our 30th birthday in a couple of months.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they got a lot of things right, and there was so much clarity around the principles of purpose and the core elements of the business, and they've done a lot of work beforehand, and it's kind of that foundation, that strong foundation, has been massively important over the years.
Yeah, we are really indebted to that vision that we sort of stepped into.
Just taking a step back then, for somebody who has never come across Unicorn, can you maybe describe the work that you do and how it's structured?
So from a commercial, like what the customer experience is. So Unicorn is a whole food supermarket with a focus on more responsible sourcing. So the customer offer is, nourishing food, interesting food that is sourced with more care for, where it's come from, how it's been produced, who's impacted by that, how the planet is impacted by that. So it's largely unprocessed. It's about 2/3 of our range is organic, including all of our fresh fruit and veg, which is a huge, huge part. Fresh fruit and veg is about 1/3 of our total sales.
And if you walk into the shop, if you've heard the word whole food shop, you'll have a certain vision. But if you walk into the shop, it's magnificent. You've got a huge range of unpacked fruit and veg, and you have such a high turnover and work so closely with our suppliers that it's so fresh and well tended and reflective of the seasons. And you've got the grower's name on all the cards, and it's, you smell the seasons as you come in, whether it's the leeks or the basil or whatever is the stronger smell at the moment. So that's something that's very different than the perception that people might have. And the fact that, it's at a price that our customers can afford as well, for the staples, for the, all your basic ingredients.
Yeah. So the idea is to compete with supermarkets. That was the vision, really, was to, not be taking trade from, small local shops. It was like, this is a place where people will come, they'll get a big trolley and they'll do the weekly shop. So the range is, comparable to a supermarket range. You won't get the micro choice that you get in a supermarket. So instead of like 60 kinds of jam, there might be like 15 kinds of jam. But we sell all the categories that you would find in a supermarket. And it means that you can do, for people that like to cook, especially, you can come and get pretty much everything you need to make nice meals. At good prices.
And then, so behind the scenes then, what's in terms of the structure of the organisation and membership, how does that work?
So I suppose we've touched on sociocracy and the fact that we've got circles. So we'll have trading circles, which would be, say, our fresh team, veg team, deli team, who'll be looking after the offer in that area. We've got like an overarching buying strategy, which flows from, whole foods, and our pricing strategy and brands that we may want to sell because they're very ethically aligned and we might want to promote them. Like we have a good stuff range, which will reflect things that we're incredibly proud to sell. So that's some of our retail offer, our grocery offer. But behind the scenes, we've got all the usual kind of things you need, the nuts and bolts to run the business, finance team, HR, governance, and we do a lot of training in-house. So say with finance and HR, people will apply internally for roles and then, that over the years they will be trained to, the highest professional level as well. So investing in people and training is a part of being a cooperative.
So we've got all the kind of functions that you would expect, I guess, in a normal business. But there isn't a hierarchy. So, we haven't specified. Unicorn is a flat pay organisation. So all members of the co-op are paid the same hourly wage, regardless of how long we've been here or what roles we do. And that's really important to us. And we aim for as flat a hierarchy as possible in terms of decision making. So obviously that doesn't mean, like I said before, that doesn't mean everyone gets a say on everything. There's a lot of, very clear domains that each team or circle have, but we don't have teams like stacked on top of each other. Everybody takes responsibility for their area. And then the idea is that decisions that affect everybody come to membership meetings where we all get a say on them. And then in the last few years, we have introduced this sort of strategic circle that Kellie's part of, which is a small group of people that look at kind of overall strategy. But the idea is that they don't impose that, they don't have the power to impose that strategy on the co-op. We agree to it or not. But obviously the rest of the membership has to respect the fact that, they've been chosen for that circle and they've put a lot of time and energy into looking at the bigger picture. And so that's where we have to, and this exists in every part of the business. We can definitely challenge what other teams and circles are doing, but we always have to be mindful of where the knowledge and expertise lie. So it's a balancing act.
It certainly is. I think that it's so much like respect and trust is so important within our organisation, but also a good level of scrutiny and accountability. So, and getting the balance right there is that's the kind of tightrope you walk, but it's really important. And as we've spoken about, like the back of office world and affordable kind of prices, it's probably worth us mentioning like that's one of the aspects that leads to affordable pricing, because there's some things that mean that we can sell things at price that we do, which are to do with how we run the business, not driving down prices with suppliers. And one of the things is we don't have a big marketing spend. We don't have, we kind of restrict certain things and are creative with our time, and so that we can pass on the savings, because labour is our biggest cost, pass on the savings to our customers. So while we do have well-experienced, well-trained people in all these functions, we don't go to an excess with it.
Yeah, so keeping our operational costs low is absolutely key to our affordability at the customer end.
And in terms of those relationships then with suppliers and the forward looking kind of strategy around that in the face of the climate crisis, the unfolding climate crisis, and potential for failed harvests, failed crops, what is your relationship with the suppliers in terms of being there for them, in terms of going through that journey with them? And what do you see, how do you see Unicorn adapting to current circumstances and future circumstances where things are invariably going to get worse and more challenging in terms of food security?
So I suppose there's kind of like two kind of things that brings to mind. That on the one hand, it's something that we've kind of been very alive to for a very long time, knowing what's happening with the climate, how that is disruptive for growers and trade generally. And then with our suppliers, I suppose we've got a range of things where it's more in our control than others, and some where we've got closer relationships with. So we've probably give more attention to growers when we talk about that, although there'll be some other suppliers who maybe will pay ahead when they've got a cash flow issue or something where we can be supportive. We always pay like super quick compared to other kind of in the grocery world. So with our growers, we've done various things, like we have some land that currently is being used to support another local grower with their agroforestry kind of approach to growing. We have a growers fund, which we've had for probably a decade now, haven't we?
Yeah,
which is
more or less
helps to pay for infrastructure for growers. These are many UK growers. That gives them an insurance maybe against different weather conditions.
Yeah, so it's often used for protected growing, although it can be for a range of things, but things that build resilience for them. So that's a kind of no strings grant that we give. And that is based on a proportion of our veg sales. We should mention actually that we do trade directly with pretty much all of our UK growers. So whereas with stuff we buy from the continent or further afield, we're going through wholesalers, with our UK farms, that is coming direct from the farmers. We're ordering direct from the farmers. So our veg buyers are speaking to them, on a weekly, if not daily basis.
So our veg buyers manage that fund. That's kind of an example of our structure, really, where it's like they're the ones that are in know. Collectively, as a co-op, we've agreed that this is something we want to do, but
they make the decision,
and they will report, and that's great for us. It's educational. But there's like the trust that they will be
best placed.
Better placed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. We also crop plan with our growers so that they have a good sense of like what we're going to be able to sell, and and then we try and honour that, obviously. It's a shame Karina isn't here actually to talk a bit more about our relation, because neither of us deal directly with our growers.
Right.
But I mean, it is only going to go in one direction in terms of how challenging it is. And we do recognise that we are at the kind of the more fortunate end of the kind of food supply chain, in that we aren't undertaking that risk that growers are.
But I think that knowledge has helped us make these decisions. So there's another group nearby that's pretty amazing called the Kinling Trust, who set up Kinling Farm, who have been in a position to support financially because, we've got a mature business that can do that, and we have reserves to use for that social value. And I think having that knowledge and understanding that that's a system that we're part of, and that makes us be able to do this. And that's kind of going back to what our principles are and what our values are and understanding our mission. It does help. But obviously there's a lot that's out of everyone's control in the way the world is. And so that's, so there's lots of things that we can't give attention to. But some of the 4% fund, the Solidarity Fund as well, is addressing impacts from climate and how that is for the local food supply in those areas increasingly, which again helps us raise our awareness as well as being something that, we can kind of be part of.
So then just to highlight the difference then between how you function and the average supermarket functions, what would be the difference between how you engage suppliers and growers and the payment system and the support that you give and the work with them? How would that compare to your average supermarket and how they would engage with them?
The one thing I feel certain about is that their payment terms are very different. So they won't pay for weeks, if not months. And I guess that's to do with, the benefits of cash flow and having money in the bank. Because I think supermarkets make a lot of their money off just like interest, basically, of just having loads of money sloshing around. So we pay within a couple of weeks, which, cash flow is really important to small businesses, and it's often why businesses fail. So that's a key difference. I don't know if I know enough about how supermarket buying operates, though, to say much more.
Yeah, I think I was going to say I could make some assumptions that we do certain things better, but I think some of them would be assumptions around with relationships with growers. I mean, from what our growers say, there's a lot of differences, but we're not in there. I know, like many years ago, I was a veg buyer, and one of our apple suppliers had stopped dealing with supermarkets because of the impact it had on his orchards, because he was being asked to supply fewer varieties, which was impacting the diversity. He was seeing the impact on the whole landscape, meaning, everything that was living in that landscape, and had started to go down that path and realised it wasn't good for healthy plants and trees or for the other animals in that, that live in that ecosystem. And he decided to no longer deal with the supermarkets, which, was a challenge for him. But I suppose it's a road maybe that you can go on as a supplier, and then you see how it's impacting, because you are maybe dealing with someone that's a more powerful negotiator.
And then in terms of organic food, so a large percentage of what you sell, the fresh produce, is organic. And obviously you're striving to ensure it's as affordable as possible. So is the approach that you're taking, is it helping people to challenge that narrative that good quality local organic food is inaccessible and expensive and you have to pay a premium? Are you challenging that?
Yes, that's been one of our big kind of drives from the beginning, is to make that kind of food accessible financially and also sort of psychologically, because there are a lot of preconceptions around, or there certainly were. I think it's changed a bit, but that organic food is for a certain type of person and certainly for a certain kind of income bracket. And we are definitely every day, so practically proving that isn't the case.
In terms of getting that awareness out, what is the response then to the people? Is it having some sort of ripple effect?
There are a number of things that we've sort of done. I mean, we do a lot of price comparisons with the supermarkets, so they're quite prominent on the shop floor. We have these big chalkboards, like huge sort of, wall displays with our prices on things compared with like Tesco, Morrisons, Sainsbury's, Asda, including on, whether it's organic or non-organic, and showing that, the gap isn't what people think it is. In many cases, we're selling organic stuff at similar prices to non-organic in the supermarkets. But I think probably just as important is the fact that people come, they do their shopping, they discover that's not the case, and then they tell people about it. And that's been our biggest driver. And I think that was kind of quite intentional from the beginning, wasn't it? That word of mouth would be a massive part of, if we got it right in the shop, that word would spread. And it takes a while, but once it takes off, it becomes quite exponential. And we've definitely seen our customer base broaden over the time that I've been here. I've really, really noticed that it's a much more kind of representative cross section of, Manchester residents than it was when I first started, and than what you would expect in a shop like this. I think, some of that is efforts we've undertaken, but a lot of it is just people coming and experiencing it and then doing the work, because they're excited about it and they like it, and you talk to your friends and networks about stuff you like. So yeah, that's a huge impact.
Unicorn is stands alone. You haven't expanded. You haven't created other branches elsewhere in the country. But what you have done is created a guide that can help people create their own unicorn-like store, and so a guide that shares about people, planning, produce, premises, all these different aspects of setting it up for themselves. Why have you taken that approach instead of choosing to expand and open up these branches, especially when you see that impact of the work that you've done, and that there's the potential to capitalize on that? Then
it's a good question, isn't it?
Yeah. So yeah, we would love to see more unicorn type shops. We think there's room for one in like every city in the UK, maybe even more than one. But there are a number of reasons. I mean, firstly, with our structure, it would be impossible to run multiple businesses with the structure we have, where we're all owners and directors. I mean, that's a challenge with, one site, one shop and 50 something people.
In case people are not aware that worker co-ops can have all different kinds of structures. So once you get bigger than us, you would generally have membership and the board. So you would have
an elected board making those sort of strategic decisions.
Yeah.
And we've not wanted that. There are ways we could do it, and we did look into it. So we've had a couple of sort of stabs at imagining or, scoping out what structures might allow us to do that. Because there's a really interesting example in the US of a network of bakery co-ops called the Arizmendi co-ops that I was able to visit about 10 years ago. And they're worker co-ops, sort of a bit like franchises, like they're all running the same kind of commercial model. They all share the name. And then there's an umbrella co-op that helps sort of coordinate things. So we did look at that, and that could be an option, but we just felt like it was all going to get too complicated, and we would rather that people just took the knowledge and the model and sort of ran with it in a way that was appropriate for their local area, that meant that they could tweak it and it wouldn't affect us, because once you have a model where it's like sharing a name and a brand, there has to be quite a strong element of control to kind of protect the integrity of, of that brand. And it just made more sense to us for people to do it the way they wanted to. And plus there was the fact that, none of us wanted to move to other cities. And, it's not like a big corporation where you can be given a kind of golden handshake to, and a relocation fee, or you'd actually be going and setting up a new co-op probably on minimum wage for the next 10 years. And so on a personal level, it's not that appetizing, or, there's, it's certainly complicated.
I think there's some of the responsibility of being a steward for this business and weighing up the risks and how that impacts some of the things that make our model unique and what we value. The risk to the integrity of the structure and our buying strategy and values and mission. It's never swung quite the other way.
Yeah. We've never felt like we've got so much spare capacity within this co-op that suddenly we can spare like 10 people to go off and start a new one, I guess.
Things can always change. We could have 3 young, like passionate, workers who were like, we will make this happen. And that could be them reinventing some of the wheel, I guess.
Yeah, but the good news is that there are 2 groups out in the wider UK at the moment who are in the planning stages for something along our lines. So we had a study visit earlier this year as part of our sort of 30th birthday celebrations, and we had about 12 people come to that. And there's a group in Leicester and a group in London who are both, on the road. So they've got business plans on the go. One of them is in negotiations with a landlord about a possible site, and we're in regular, contact with them. The group in Leicester particularly, we went down and spoke at a meeting a few months ago, and we've, as well as the Grow Grocery Guide, we've sort of been, helping with lots of other sort of bits and pieces as they've been on that journey. So yeah, it could be that this is the year, or maybe next year is the year when there might be a couple of things on a similar scale.
And we are also in regular contact with other like whole food shops around the country who maybe trading is not as robust as it is for us, who connect when they need, another check-in with support or to course correct. There's one currently being to it this week, and it's a fairly regular thing. I think because we are a fairly solid trading engine and we do understand what works and what doesn't. So, there's value in that point of contact within our kind of whole food world and cooperative world.
Yeah.
Do you think it would be a fair statement to say that in terms of cooperatives, there isn't necessarily limits to growth, limits to kind of expanding the idea, the organization? It's more just about, it's more the dynamics in terms of how it's structured, how it's the decision making processes, and obviously the individuals who are present at a time. But that and maybe because you called yourselves stewards rather than necessarily owners of a business, and so that different perception of how you perceive yourselves within the organization as well, that you want to protect what you have and ensure that it's robust and resilient, to be able to then hand it on to other people, rather than just being growth focused and trying to replicate and push that particular aspect of it, where you might as I think we'll touch upon in terms of attempts to try and get some land and try and modify the supply chain. That, and I'm rambling now, and I need to try and wrap this up.
I think what we're kind of saying is, it rings a bell. There's always a trade-off to scalability, and some of that is, growth to what end? What are we gaining? More of what? More of something that is this good, or more of something that's lesser that we don't really want to be part of? Can we encourage growth from others and help, plant those seeds and help, water those seedlings, because we have got this knowledge and these resources. And so, these are questions that will maybe get different answers with a different group of people. But worker co-ops can be a massive scale with a different structure. It's not a limit to scale, but, we're all kind of unique organizations.
Yeah. I do think the word steward, how sometimes like finding the right word for something just really helps you understand it. And I feel like for me anyway, I've only been using the word steward in terms of my role here, on our role here, for about 5 years, but it's been so useful to me to have that word, steward or caretaker. And I use it now when I'm just describing to people I meet what I do. I'll start by saying we're all owners of the business, and then I'll caveat it to say, we call ourselves stewards because it's more of a caretaking role. Like, it's not ownership in the sense of it's ours to do whatever we want with. We're stewarding it. We own it in the sense that nobody else owns it, but steward is a more accurate, way to describe it. And that seems to really work for other people to kind of get their heads around it as well.
I think so. I think that mindset, it's like about how we think about the planet. If we think about it as the mother lode that we own to use and abuse, we have a certain mindset. If we think of it as we're stewards and caretakers, to be there for our children, our grandchildren, we treat it with more respect. We limited resources are acknowledged and treated sensitively and shared equitably. It's a different mindset. And I think, when you are trading in a world that is very growth focused, it can look and like an anomaly and unusual when you don't go down the expected path.
And so how did that evolution occur then? If you're saying that it's only recently or the past few years that you've started using that term steward and stewardship, we
always understood it. We always understood that we weren't owners in the conventional sense. Well, I don't know where it came from.
I think for me, as our membership grew and we used the word worker owner, people took it as I own this rather than I'm looking after it. You could kind of notice that, and it's that kind of how that word is kind of can have a different emphasis. And I think then it's like we need to use language that's emphasizing our care for this place.
And to kind of make it really clear that it wasn't ours to take from and sort of use as our personal kind of, not that anyone's ever been sort of seeing unicorn as a get rich quick scheme. It definitely has never been that for anyone, but a sense of like, what can it do for me? Sometimes crept in, because we haven't talked about this, but we did get to a point where we were a lot bigger than we are now.
Okay.
So we peaked at about 75 members, so pre-pandemic, so around 2020. And for various reasons, we've kind of shrunk back down. Trade hasn't particularly shrunk, but we've been able to service the same level of sales with less people, which is, that's a kind of efficiency story of its own. But yeah, when we were at that number and still all directors, there was maybe a little bit of it was maybe getting a little bit diluted, the sense of really what we were doing here. So yeah, it was probably around then, wasn't it? And I think it was you that was sort of instigating that thinking.
Yeah, which, as Debbie said, was there from the start. You pay a £1 share, which you take when you leave,
that's the limit of.
So it's there to be symbolic of, this is held by the co-op while you work here, and then it's gone. You don't. So it's always been there. But yeah, sometimes language is helpful to how you think about things.
And how does that impact recruitment then? Because might it have been that when you were at that peak in terms of numbers, that it was also the perception of people that was being diluted as a consequence of that number, that maybe there were people who weren't as aligned on the cooperative philosophy. How do you recruit for people now? Do you care about their philosophy and their experience around co-ops, or are you just more focused on work ethic?
They don't need to have any experience of co-ops, but they do really need to understand what it is. And I don't want to make it sound like, the people that have left in that, since we've shrunk, we've lost some amazing people that completely were like 100% committed to the idea of stewardship and cooperativism.
It's not to the individual,
it's not
to the
all,
nature of the size.
It's the size,
right.
Yeah.
Okay, yep.
And I think, this isn't something that's really changed. It is really hard to communicate what a worker co-op is to someone that's never worked in one. I joined this business having no idea what I was getting into. It was the values around the way we traded that attracted me. And even though, I was coming from a sort of environmental and social activism background, and I had actually been part of a little food co-op at university, I still didn't understand what a worker co-op was until I was, 2 or 3 years in to this place. So I think it's actually, yes, there has to be a sort of an interest and a kind of openness and an excitement about it from people when they're being recruited, but it's really on us in a big way to kind of teach it through doing and to kind of involve people in an appropriate way in those first few years and kind of nurture that interest and enthusiasm for cooperative working.
Yeah, because a lot of our work is what some people might think is mundane shop floor work. For a lot of us, when you have the different values involved in that, I absolutely love working on the till, which some people might see as a mundane job. But, you see our customers age with us, you have a lovely connection where, generating a market for this great food that we see going through the tills, and we can tell them about the growers, and it's like it's a beautiful community shop experience. And that's a lot of our work. A lot of our work is with our hands on the shop floor, lumping things around, putting them through tills. So people can come with the perception that I'm joining a co-op and I'm going to be a director with a clipboard or doing this and that, where it's kind of that's a little bit of your job. This is a lot of your job. And so recruiting people requires people who like retail work, hard graft, and collective work with a team towards a shared vision as well, who are willing to learn to communicate well within a group and to listen to people, so that quieter voices can be heard. All these different aspects that are really important part of how we work.
Yeah, so it's not really about experience. It's a sort of openness to the rights and rewards of being part of a worker co-op, because there are very much both. We are, it's an amazing business to be part of, where you get to kind of have so much, you're so empowered in this business to participate, but that comes with a lot of responsibilities. And there have been people that it hasn't been for them, over our years of trading, there's been many people who have come and tried it and it's not been quite right. Sometimes that might be our bad, that we've not kind of done that right, but other times it's just not been the right fit. So recently I worked out the average length of service of co-op members, and it's 14 years at this point. So, we are at the...
It's got to be a sign that some things are good.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And a lot of those people, myself included, did not plan to stay for several decades.
Yeah.
No, I've never been anywhere longer than 2 years. I thought that was a lifetime.
Yeah. In terms of then, so expanding the organization on some level, you've managed to achieve that through raising funds from your customers and community through loan stock on multiple occasions, I believe. Can you maybe explain, because that's something obviously that is a barrier for worker co-ops, is raising funds because of the workings. You can't have shareholders and things like that, just to be clear. So, but you've managed to find a method by which you don't have to have limits in terms of your aspirations and what you want to achieve with the organization by getting this loan stock from your community. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that and how you achieved it and how it worked and any lessons learned?
So we've done it 3 times. The initial loan stock was when the business was set up. So before we had customers. So a lot of that was through friends and family and maybe people within the cooperative network that the founders knew. So it was a smaller amount, but a really important amount, because we started off renting a little space in this building with a very basic infrastructure, but that cost something. So that helped. And they had a little bit of money from the co-op as well. And then in 2003, when we were buying the building was £1 million, which for us at the time was a massive leap. We planned to buy the building in 5 years from them. We had this, idea of a plan. Then it went up for sale. So it was we had an amount that we could get as a commercial mortgage, but we were still down about 400,000 from that. So we raised money via our loan stock, which then we had a customer base, but we were quite overwhelmed by how many people did invest, at what scale, choosing what interest rate, at what speed as well, because we needed really quickly to find out what people's what the intent was, so that we could kind of secure the mortgage and put in a serious offer. And that was done through some local media and some national media, largely just talking to our customers on the shop floor, and them already being quite excited about what we did, and having, being with us on that leap of faith of, this next step. Third time we did it was when we were buying the land. And we already had a track record. We already had people who'd invested in us a couple of times. And so that was a simpler thing, in a sense. We've already had loan stock. We've paid you back. We've got another plan. This is giving clarity of the aim, the idea of what it's going towards, how it's building on this model of a principal business that we've got, and then customers wanting to be on board with that. So the third time was raising the money for the land, and then we bought the land. And so every time it's been for a period of 5 years, and we've paid people back. And we've not raised any loan stock since then, because we've not had a need to, but it's been like a really valuable way to do it. It's as you say, it's meant that there is somewhere outside the banks for us to go to. And also it's been good for us having that connection with our customers, explaining what we're doing, having that feedback, which is like a real tangible thing of, yes, we're on board with this. We also think that's great.
It is a really nice, because obviously community shares are, similar in some ways, but they do give the community an actual share, and a voice, a say in the project. And as a worker co-op, decision making has to stay within the worker membership. But loan stock is, like Kelly says, it's a way of people kind of very practically kind of showing their support for something, and it was often on a very small scale. People would put in just a small amount, but they'll still tell us, when I'm working on the till, I get chatting to someone and they'll say, I helped you raise money to buy this building. And it's just, they feel like a little stake in it,
Mm-hmm.
in a really, and they do have a little stake in it, because we couldn't have done it without them. So, but yeah, the worker kind of members get to retain the decision-making power, which is so integral to worker co-ops. So it's great to have that route, for worker co-ops to use.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it seems like it's really solidified the relationship between you and your customers. It's a means to achieve that, because they are quite literally investing in you and helping and supporting you. And that must be a great feeling as well, from their perspective, to just be able to give back to something that has given so much to them as well, in terms of great food and everything that you do at Unicorn. And can you maybe share a little bit about your experience with the land and what you hope to achieve and how that all unfolded?
So the idea was to increase the supply of local food, organic local food, and, protect take some farmland into organic production that hadn't been previously. And, with the sort of biodiversity benefits that would bring. We did produce food on it so a new co-op of growers was formed, which was originally 2 Unicorn members who went part-time here to do that. And then there was a couple of other people involved as well. And they did farm it for a number of years, and we sold the produce. And I mean, the land was transformed. It looks so different. There's loads and loads of native hedging that we put in. The ponds were sorted out. There's loads of wildflower sections. There's a barn with a borehole and solar panels on the roof.
Resident owls.
Yeah. And there's been lots of sort of biodiversity wins with it, but commercially they really struggled to make a go of it. There was an issue with some disruption from drainage. So United Utilities had some big,
it's been a while,
some big pipes under the land, and they had to be, nothing to do with us. They had to be replaced at some point, and it really affected the actual drainage of the land. So
When
our drainage.
things were already challenging and
Yeah.
tough, you've got two guys who had small children who were the growers,
Yeah.
weather conditions, improving the infrastructure, and then that affecting the soil.
I mean, years later, they had to go into a sort of legal situation with United Utilities, and years later, they were awarded compensation. But these things drag on because basically farmland is drained. There's a network of lots of small pipes that are kind of controlling, the water flow around all of our improved farmland. We just don't see it. So, I mean, we learned a lot about all that kind of thing through this process. But yeah, all this big infrastructure work just completely messed that up. And I think that was the final straw, really. So they decided after a few years, they grew some amazing produce, but the amount of labour that was going into it just wasn't, the profit that can be made from veg is, again, that was, a very practical kind of learning for us about how hard it is to be a farmer.
Yeah, and things like not having accommodation on site, travelling to and from somewhere, things that can make the grower's life a little bit easier, especially when certain crops need a bit more attention at certain times of year.
It was also a funny size, so it was like field scale crops, so it's bigger than a market garden. I can't remember the acreage
21
now. Right, so much bigger than a market garden, and doing field scale crops that aren't very high value but not big enough to do it with real economy of scale. So all in all, it wasn't, for lots of different reasons, it wasn't a viable commercial business, and it did need to be a commercial business. Unicorn has always been completely independent of grants. It's not, that was never how we didn't want to be running things that needed to be subsidized. But the good news is that the land has kind of served its purpose, because in more recent years, Kindling, who Kellie mentioned, who are another sort of local social enterprise who've been running food and farming projects for years, they had been planning to buy a farm in that area of Greater Manchester. And in preparation for doing so, they took on a section of our land to use as a nursery for their agroforestry projects. So they did that, and they now do have a farm, and those trees that were raised on our land are now planted up there as the sort of bones for their quite pioneering agroforestry farm which is it's already supplying us and will do so on a bigger scale in the coming years. So that's where we're at with that.
Mm-hmm.
But it was probably a lesson in, well, I think, in sticking to what we know. We are grocers and we do a really good job of that. And that's what our kind of commercial model is really good at doing.
Yeah, so having this scenario now where it's helping provide space for something that's really valuable for them, while we're helping generate a market for goods that they
produce,
because that was part of their business plan, that we need to be able to sell X amount of. It's kind of, you kind of finding where you are best fit to work with them within that supply chain, where we've got the most value for them, where they have for us, so that we can all kind of, work well in a sustainable way long term. And I think
do
that's
the bit we're good at.
The bit we're good at. Yeah.
So you're right. We found our place in that ecosystem.
It seems like that's working pretty well now. Yeah.
So then the current environment that Unicorn's functioning within as a worker co-op, and you said you don't take grants, you don't want anything subsidized. So is the environment within the UK particularly, would you say it's challenging? Would you say it's hostile? Would you say it's it nurtures worker co-ops and the work that you're doing? Like, what do you think the barriers are within the particular kind of UK, England environment that you're having to deal with to survive?
I mean, we're treated very much the same as any other business. There's no acknowledgement of any growth of community wealth rather than individual shareholder wealth, or, social value that you might add. There's, that they're not part of the mix. And it'd be interesting if there could be something that could be acknowledged there that means that, your business is providing more to the local economy and sharing wealth more equally. But I don't know. Wouldn't have any kind of policy suggestions around that. I do think more could be considered around newer worker co-ops, things that could help people in that starting ground, especially with using properties that are maybe empty in shopping centres, or, acknowledging them in a way that they do bring social value to an area. And I also think there's other things that are really at the heart of how we trade that could be interesting policy decisions around organic produce, and maybe we could echo some policies from Europe where there could be policies around 40% organic procurement from the UK for schools and hospitals, so that, it encourages food security because it encourages a guaranteed market for growers. They can then, know that in years to come, they can keep growing this produce. This produce is massively beneficial for the soil, for biodiversity, for, future resilience with climate change. So I think there are things that can be done that come to mind, but for us on the high street, I've kind of got less tangible kind of things that could be helpful. Some recognition would be interesting, but I don't know how that would appear.
Yeah, I mean, certainly for startups, there's so little support practically for, there used to be, I think the sort of 70s was the heyday of there being a lot of money going into national and particularly regional cooperative development agencies where, there was serious support for people that were interested in starting worker co-ops. And you can see as that grew, the number of worker co-ops grew. It wasn't like, it's a very, very tangible association that if you provide that infrastructure for people and make it a viable option for people that want to start new businesses or take over existing businesses, it will have results. In terms of operating worker co-ops, I suppose, the gig economy is a real, because worker co-ops are kind of the antithesis of the gig economy. They want to provide stable, secure, reasonably paid employment to their workers. And when you're competing with the gig economy, that's, and Amazon and, the people where it's a real sort of race to the bottom in terms of, the way employees are treated, the way products are sourced. It is challenging, but there are plenty of people doing it and finding creative ways to make it work. For us, we don't have the economies of scale that Tesco do, but we also don't pay shareholders anything, and we don't pay, executives hundreds of thousands of pounds in bonuses or wages or whatever. So certainly not impossible.
I just wanted to, before I ask the final questions, I just wanted to maybe elaborate or explore a bit further what you're saying about the drop off of support from the 70s being the heyday, 70s where you see that corresponding increase in the number of co-ops, and what has happened since then to create a situation where it's harder, where fewer people are aware and conscious of
I
co-ops.
think I might be wrong about that. It might have been the 80s. There was growth,
okay.
The growth throughout sort of 70s and 80s, I think. But then obviously there was Thatcherism and, very little support for worker ownership. And then with New Labour, there was much more of a shift towards social enterprise, which co-ops kind of fall under, but it was very much broadened out into social enterprise. So the specific focus on worker co-ops was lost, and the development agencies had closed.
And a lot of the worker co-ops were in the whole food kind of business. Whole food business is less processed, more, it's less part of the whole corporate world. And in the 80s, you had the growth at the supermarkets, a change at the high streets. So there's a lot of variables as well, kind of, individualism.
And so then, just to wrap up, if someone just took one thing away from how Unicorn works, what would you want that to be?
So one thing that we've not touched on that I think it's worth mentioning is that I think, we've talked a lot about how it benefits us being part of a worker co-op in terms of, being empowered and fulfilled and, having work that we love. But I think, we've not sort of talked so much about how customers experience that. And I think there is a huge USP in a business, in any business. But, for us, it's like, take our, you walk into the shop and you're hit with this huge fruit and veg section. And part of the reason it's so amazing is because you have empowered workers who aren't just moving boxes around, and following instructions on a clipboard. You've got highly motivated, highly skilled worker owners who are engaged in the supply chain. They're talking to the farmers, they're involved in ordering the produce. They are, if something isn't right, they're able to get on the phone to the farmer or reduce the price or send it up to the kitchen or, actually take action and talk to the customers about, what they know about the harvest this year or the weather conditions or the growers doing this variety of strawberries for the first time and, let us know what you think of them so we can feed it back. It just transforms that kind of thing. It transforms the customer experience. And even though not all of our customers know that we're a worker co-op or really quite what that means, they all do they experience very tangible difference shopping with us because we are a worker co-op. So it's got a huge kind of commercial and, competitive advantage on top of all the sort of beautiful things it brings to us as workers and more values-based side of things. So yeah, it gives you a huge competitive advantage.
Yeah, I think what I was going to say is kind of encompassing that, but it's like collective good rather than individual preferences and community wealth rather than individual wealth. And when we talk about the community, it is our customers, it is our suppliers, our growers, the workers. It's the whole shebang. The planet, etc. So it's kind of that's what we kind of think of, being part of our network.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. It's been great chatting to you. And yeah, thank you.
It's been really interesting. Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Everything Debbie, Kellie and I discussed is in the show notes. And you'll find this episode and the full archive at content.changingthenarrative.media, where you can also become a member and sign up for the newsletter. Please share, comment, and subscribe wherever you listen to this podcast so more people can learn about the alternative ways we can do business. If you would like to support the podcast and Changing the Narrative, then please consider becoming a paying member. New episodes of How Not to Do Business are available every second Tuesday. Thanks for listening.